Welcome. Welcome, everyone. We've got the mayor and the council person setting up chairs here. So welcome. I'm Kim Duffy, chairperson of the Holladay Historical Commission. Our commission's purpose is to research and preserve the history of Holladay, the people who lived here, what they did, and the things they built. Then we educate the public on what we gather. This is why we started this speaker series nearly 3 years ago. And in that time, we've had a renowned biologist tell us what this landscape looked like before the settlers arrived. We had a Native American author come and talk to us about what life was like for his people before the settlers arrived. We've had lectures on pioneer settlement and architecture, and the former director of Preservation Utah came to talk to us about the grand estates of Holladay, the Bambergers, the Walkers, the Dreyfus, and the Moyle families. And Doug Wright was here to give us the history of radio not too long ago. Our mid-century modern lecturer drove up and down nearly every street in Holladay and came away saying that Holladay has more mid-century treasures than any city in Utah, and explained why they are worth saving. This body of research creates a narrative arc of Holladay that benefits the citizens and informs our elected officials. Now to the monastery. First of all, we have been careful to keep these lectures secular, but people have been bugging me for a couple of years to have a lecture on the Carmelites. And that's tricky because they're cloistered and they don't invite people to come in and sort through their papers. But I had a link with my mother-in-law, Mary Duffy, who has always been good friends with the Carmelites in Holladay. So I called the monastery and spoke with a nun, and I said, I'm Mary Duffy's daughter-in-law. Can I come in and interview a nun and go through your papers and look at your photos? And she said, yes. She said, we love Holladay and we want to do whatever we can to help. So we got to interview Sister Margaret Mary, copy their photos and clippings, and meet their dog. I had 2 more visits, and the best one was the afternoon. They unlocked the chapel and let me sit in there alone in the dark for as long as I wanted. For this lecture, I used as a framework a history they published in 2002, along with newspaper archives, ancestry sites, and the kind of coincidental connections that happen in Small Lake City. I'll talk about 4 of the nuns, the Carmelite fair, the building of their chapel, and a day in the life. I want to thank Megan Adderman, our arts and culture manager, who helps us with everything. Hang on. Few Holladay residents have been inside the monastery at 5714 Holladay Boulevard, so there's a lot of curiosity about what goes on in there. And though cloistered and carnival are seldom heard in the same sentence, these cloistered nuns open their convent one Sunday a year for the biggest and longest running event in Holladay history, now in its 67th year, the Carmelite Fair. This event is for everyone, the religious, the non-religious, but mostly it's for families. And of course, to raise funds so that the nuns can do what they do every day. They pray. They pray for the salvation of all souls, Catholics, Mormons, humanists, skeptics. They pray. Where did Carmelites come from? The official name of this monastery is the Carmel of the Immaculate Heart of Mary Monastery. Carmel in this case refers to Mount Carmel in this region. This region, of course, has had many names over the centuries. Carmel is from the Hebrew word karam, which means garden or orchard. The Mount Carmel range has been a draw for millennia. Archaeological research reveals evidence of at least 500,000 years of human evolution and Mount Carmel is protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Carmelites' history focuses on the 12th century, when hermits inhabited caves in these mountains and observed vows of silence, seclusion, and abstinence. These hermits were followers of the biblical prophet Elijah, who was associated with Mount Carmel. The dates are hard to pin down, but around the 13th century, these hermits were forced to abandon the caves due to persecution, and they dispersed. In 1562, St. Therese of Avila, Spain, founded a reformed Carmelite convent with stricter, primitive rules that returned the Carmelites to their pristine state. The monastery here displays this statue of their founder, Sister Therese of Avila, mystic and doctor of the church. These Carmelite monasteries spread to Europe and then to America in 1790, then west to California in 1913. In the late 1940s, Bishop Dwayne Hunt of the Salt Lake Diocese or District invited Carmelites in Alhambra, California to establish a monastery in Salt Lake. 5 nuns who had never set foot outside the monastery in Alhambra left their sisters and boarded a train for Salt Lake. Of those 5 nuns who came here in 1952, 2 of them are still living in the monastery here in Holladay, 72 years later. And one of them, Sister Margaret Mary, pictured here decades ago, she's the first nun I'll talk about. Incidentally, as my husband pointed out, many of these nuns have Mary as a part of their name. So be prepared for it to be slightly confusing. In the 1940s, when Sister Margaret Mary heard that there was going to be a convent in Utah, she asked to go. She was thrilled to learn that there'd be a convent in Utah because in high school, she read books about the Wild West and thought living here would be dramatic. And it is, isn't it? She said, I'm still to this day thrilled to be in Utah. This place here, this is just where I want to be. She said, I was among the 5 nuns that came to Salt Lake by train in 1952. And here they are in front of the train, accompanied by the Holy Cross nuns. Sister Margaret Mary, 25 years old, is third from the left, looking slightly astonished. She said, the train wasn't that fun because it was too slow. It stopped at every milk station between Los Angeles and here, but we saw the bright lights of Las Vegas during a short layover. She continued, I can still recall what it was like on that December night in 1952, when we first set foot on Utah soil, how we were so welcomed with so much love by the late Bishop Hunt and the Holy Cross nuns. We felt immediately the deep bond for the people of Utah. They had sent ahead a postulant, or future nun, Lurleen Romney Cheney, to prepare the living quarters for the sisters. Lurleen, the second nun we'll talk about, was a sister to Marion G. Romney, who would later become an apostle in the LDS Church, and who is also related to Mitt Romney. Whether she is related to Liz Cheney is a rabbit hole I resisted going down. I'm dying to know, though. Lurleen had her hands full preparing the convent at 1063 East, 2nd South. It was a rickety old house. Part of it had burned and simply been walled off. It had been empty for 2 years and was reputed to be haunted. It had a coal-fired furnace, so the sisters had to take turns going down into the basement to take the clinkers out of the furnace. How many of you know what clinkers are? Yeah, right. They're the lump that's left after the coal burns. Then they'd refill the hopper with coal and bring the clinkers back out. That's a lot of basement time in a creepy house. Originally, their beds were made of planks covered with straw mattresses. On the wall over each bed was a simple bare cross. They spruced up the place enough to hold the first Mass, and on that day, Lurleen Romney Cheney became Sister Mary Catherine. Bishop Hunt was worried that cloistered nuns wouldn't have enough to eat, because Carmelites subsist on alms. He wanted the community to get to know the nuns better, so he directed them not to cloister themselves for the first 3 months, and asked the 9 Catholic parishes to bring them food. During this 3-month period, they were allowed an hour of outdoor time every day. Sister Margaret Mary recalled, "We liked to sit on the big front porch. The porch had lattices, and when we came out, we'd see the little kids playing on the lattices. We were friendly to them and liked to give them treats. After a while, we found out that a man was living under the porch. We were kind of scared. So Sister Catherine, who had been a Mormon with many relatives in Salt Lake, found a cousin down the street, and he came over and boarded up the hole." The nuns continued to exist on the kindness of the community, the parishes and the Catholic Women's League, who all brought them food and necessities. As a way to raise funds, they began to bake altar bread, which is their Holy Communion. This was sold to Episcopal, Lutheran, and Catholic churches in the Intermountain West, which they continue to do today. A word about the photos. Many of these are from their archives, taken in the old convent downtown. But the nuns are engaged in the same rituals and activities today as they were then, just in a different decade, in a different convent. It would have been too distracting, and I was already a distraction, for me to take more photos. Plus, the old photos are great. Here they are making altar bread at the old convent. You'll see the nun's habit here, and she's wearing an apron over her tunic. Sister Mary Catherine, being a former Mormon, knew how to sew, knit, and crochet. She taught the other nuns how to paint designs, make baby outfits, and blankets to sew. Here she is with Sister Mary Joseph. To raise funds for their food and expenses, they held tea parties where people could buy handmade items. This is how the annual tea sale began, which would ultimately become the Carmelite Fair, but that was later. The old house on 2nd South quickly became unsuitable for a Carmelite monastery. 3 more nuns joined, and now they had 8. They were cramped, and the noise from the neighborhood disrupted the quiet necessary for a life of prayer. They began to look around for possibilities. Holladay was an unincorporated part of Salt Lake County, still semi-rural. The sisters found a house with acreage away from buildings owned by Fred and Arlene Kessler, but they couldn't afford it. Ultimately, though, the Kesslers couldn't find another buyer, so Father William McDougall and attorney Richard Hogan came up with some funds. Other funds were donated. The nuns sold their house in town and mortgaged the Holladay property in September of 1956. The balance they couldn't pay was covered by the Cosgriff family. Their new home was a 4-acre lot with a 14-room cobblestone and clapboard house, which would enable them to expand their group. The sisters started a vegetable garden and orchard. They canned their produce to be more self-sufficient. The area was farmland, so their neighbors were cows and chickens and pigs, not to mention the deer, fox, coyote, wild turkeys, and pheasants that I've spotted in Holladay in the last year. But even with the rural seclusion, there were problems with this house, so don't fall in love with it. According to the Intermountain Catholic Bulletin, the building was so ramshackle that it threatened to collapse. The house leaned, the roof leaked, the septic tank was so precarious that the nuns were afraid to do their laundry. In addition, a construction company was stealing water from the nuns' share of Big Cottonwood Creek, risking a lawsuit against them from the downstream users. They lived under these conditions for 20 years. All the while saving money from the fair to pay off the mortgage on a leaning house, which now required about 75 buckets to catch the rain from the leaking roof. From the Intermountain Catholic Bulletin again. By this time, Bishop Joseph Federal had taken over the diocese. He was not in favor of the Carmelites' plans for a new building and questioned certain things about how Mother Superior Marie Therese wanted to build the monastery. But then a well-known Carmelite priest from back east arrived to advise Bishop Federal that the nuns knew what they needed and he should let Mother Superior do what she wanted. A series of letters ensued among the bishop, the apostolic delegate, and Mother Superior. Bishop Federal actually hired a private investigator to check on the man she hired to manage their finances and discovered that he was a convict. But as it turns out, he never stole from the nuns and was actually very good to them. I don't know how many months all of this went on, but they were finally able to build a temporary chapel and nuns' quarters in 1975, 20 years after moving to Holladay. Then in 1977, benefactors offered to erect a permanent chapel in memory of Frank and Josephine Prinster, who started the city markets in Colorado, and whose son was Brother Nicholas, a Trappist monk at the Abbey of the Holy Trinity in Huntsville, Utah. Some of you might remember him. But I wanted to know who designed this chapel. Neither the diocese nor the nuns knew who the architect was. Then, by sheer coincidence, I happened to step into St. Vincent's Church on Spring Lane in December and discovered that the stained glass windows were like the ones I had just photographed at the monastery. So I got in touch with an old friend, Father John Norman, who told me that St. Vincent's Church was designed by Cecil Holland. Our mid-century lecturer that I talked about at the first of this, Tim Oliver, seconded that. So, did Cecil Holland design this monastery as well? Cecil Holland died 9 years ago, but I was able to find his son, John, who told me that his father Cecil absolutely designed the Carmelite chapel. As he remembers all that turmoil I referred to, getting the chapel built, it created an enormous amount of stress for his father. And he also remembered that, in the end, it got built because the Mother Superior got it built. Now they finally had a proper chapel, choir, and sacristy. Our commissioner, Marty Bradley, describes the chapel. The highlight of the interior is a striking wood truss system that references those of the medieval church. The stark white plaster ceiling contrasts with the warmth of the more modern brick on the lower half of the wall. The windows are stunning, and they don't look like most other stained glass windows. The sister didn't know who made them, so I show these images to the usual stained glass artists in Salt Lake. They said the windows were made with a technique called dalle de verre, a French term meaning glass slab. This unusual technique uses chunks of glass of various thicknesses and textures, which are laid in a pattern on a framed bed of sand. Then concrete or resin is poured around the glass. John Holland remembers that his father had them fabricated in Italy, then shipped to Holladay. That's more than 24 panels between St. Vincent's and the monastery. Quite a commitment to beauty. These windows are tactile, and you want to go up and feel them. But you're probably not going to do that at the monastery. So drive down to St. Vincent's on Spring Lane, which has Cecil Holland's similar windows, and they're more accessible. You can see that some of the chunks are smooth and others are chiseled. Features like the faces are sometimes set proud of the surface to accentuate them. The thick glass makes for a very saturated color, in these blocky, modernist designs. By 1985, 2 more utilitarian wings were added to the monastery grounds, and then in 1987, their neighbors, Don and Wilma Nichols, put 4 acres up for sale. Well, this created a now or never decision for the sisters because their chapel was only 50 feet from the property line. The area zoned 1 acre, but 4 giant houses would disrupt the atmosphere of silence and solitude. Bishop Wiegand of Salt Lake Diocese gave his approval to purchase the land, and the nuns solicited funds from foundations. The sellers, the Nichols, donated 1 acre with the understanding that the nuns would never sell to outsiders. This brought the price within range for the sisters. They purchased the land with an interest-free loan and increased their property to 8 acres to provide a permanent envelope of space. I couldn't resist including this grainy image from the Salt Lake Tribune of the Nichols handing the keys through the grill to a nun on the backside as Exeter and Sister Mary Joseph Beans. More about her in a minute. So they had enough land, but there were still utilities, insurance, medical bills, and mortgages to pay. Carmelites take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Again, they subsist on alms. The sisters here support themselves by making and selling their altar breads, jam, and candies, but this barely makes ends meet. And this is where Sister Mary Joseph's work expanded in the 1980s. She's the 3rd nun we'll talk about. Sister Mary Joseph is the extern, or the sister who provides a link between the nuns and the outside world. She's the one you might have seen on a riding mower or running a chainsaw on the grounds as you walk by. If you spoke with a Carmelite nun in person between 1975 and 2010, it was probably Sister Mary Joseph. If you saw a nun shopping, it was Sister Mary Joseph. If you saw a tunic-draped figure striding down Holladay Boulevard with a couple of dogs, it was Sister Mary Joseph. She had a succession of black lab mixes whom she continued to name either Inky or Shadow, and who guarded the property and greeted guests. She was a native Utah who graduated top of her class at BYU Nursing School, then left the LDS Church and became a Catholic. She briefly worked as a public health nurse, but felt her calling as a Carmelite nun. She joined the Carmelites at age 30 in 1963. From 1975 on, she was the face of the Carmelites, who always had a big smile and a couple of dogs. Sister Mary Joseph's humor was on display in an article in the Salt Lake Tribune in 1982. She said, "I'm the unholy one. There's no reason to change clothes when I go downtown. I don't need to talk about God. My clothing always causes some kind of a reaction from people. When they see me, they automatically think about God. My habit is a witness and a protection." The sisters used to wear rope sandals, she added, looking down at her sneakers. "Things have changed," she said. "We don't wash our clothes on a washboard. We use modern conveniences." She said that when she was first cloistered, she climbed the walls for a while. She said, "It goes against the grain to be silent in today's society. There's a great adjustment period when a sister first enters the convent. You're faced with yourself and God, and you really get to know yourself. Sometimes it can be traumatic because you find out you're not the nice person you thought you were. You get to know yourself in ways you never did before. It takes you down a few pegs." And here she is in the next slide being taken down a few pegs by their dogs. Now let's talk about the fair. Through Sister Mary Joseph's contacts, her energy, and her natural joie de vivre, the fair became an all-out carnival. With ethnic foods, Basque dancers, yodelers, bagpipers, Greek dancers, nun runs, a Ferris wheel, games, auctions for weekends in Wendover, and a car raffled off every year. Neighbors loaned their ponies for the pony rides. The nuns sold their handmade items. In 1984, they had skydivers jumping from a plane piloted by a priest. You can't make this stuff up. Parking became impossible, so they began running shuttle buses from the Cottonwood Mall. Sister Mary Joseph chaired the fair until her death in 2010. By that point, the fair had just become too big. With the Board of Health, food permits, overhead, and with Sister Mary Joseph gone, they decided to downsize, and that's how it remains today. Somewhat simplified, but very popular, thanks to legions of volunteers and donations. It's time to acknowledge all the dogs in these pictures. Dogs are a fixture at the monastery. Rocket, Calla, Shadow, Inky, Trumpet. The nuns call them guard dogs. They are loved and likely spoiled. Their current guard dog is a golden husky mix called Trumpet. I asked the nuns why he was called Trumpet, and then I understood next time I visited when I heard him running back and forth, barking and alerting the nuns inside the cloister. There was danger on the premises. So what do nuns do when they're not holding a fair? Catholic orders have different focuses, like working with the poor, teaching, nursing, or social work. Sister Therese told us that their mission is love and to pray for the whole human race, past, present, future. They fast, do penance, and do sacrifices for the good of all. They pray 6 hours a day for the salvation of all souls, for peace in the world, and for peace in everyone's heart. They pray for the sick and suffering, and for the intentions of people who ask for a prayer. One of the sisters said that the letters they receive from people asking for prayers keeps them informed on what's happening in the world. She said, "We pray better if we're conscious of the outside world's problems." What is their day like? They rise at 5:15, pray, and chant the Psalms. A priest arrives and they celebrate daily Mass at 7:30 in their chapel. And by the way, the public is welcome to Mass in their chapel. You don't have to know anything. You don't have to do anything. You can just observe. After Mass, the nuns have a breakfast of coffee, bread, and cereal. They clean up, do chores. There are endless chores. Imagine 11 women, some of whom are in their 80s and 90s, handling the upkeep on buildings which are 50 plus years old, upkeep on 8 acres, and caring for their aging nuns. They must prepare for all the Holy Day celebrations and for the Herculean effort of the fair, which means that as soon as the fair is over, they start working on the next fair. They bottle vegetables and fruit from their gardens and orchards. Here they are in a garden with Joseph Howa of Howa Construction, contractor on some of their buildings. Their main meal of the day is at 11:30. Until 7 years ago, the nuns were vegetarians. Now they do eat meat, but they eat it sparingly. They do a partial fast and practice virtues every year from September through Easter. They eat less and pray more. After lunch, they do dishes, have recreation. They sit together and talk while doing handiwork. More dogs. Most of the day, the nuns communicate non-verbally during prescribed periods. During those times, however, there can be so much talk and laughing they're afraid the neighbors can hear. The Carmelites sew their own habits. Sister Mary Joseph said, each part of the habit means something to us. The white underpart of the habit is made in the form of a cross. The black helmet represents modesty, and the brown tunic is like what Christ wore. The Carmelites' habit has changed very little over centuries, except for the sneakers. They sing throughout the day as part of their prayers, and they do Gregorian chants. Some of them play piano or organ. They raise the American flag every day and sing God Bless America on July 4th. At 1 o'clock, they visit the Blessed Sacrament, which means they go into the chapel to pray to the Lord. They listen to spiritual readings, rest, and do chores. They work from 3 to 4:30, go to Vespers until 6 p.m., and then have a light supper. They wash dishes and have recreation again until 8 p.m., then night prayer. After that, they have an hour of free time, then a period of quiet prayer. Lights out at 10 p.m. Every Sunday is a day of rest. Why would someone want to become a nun? What the stories of these 4 nuns have in common is that they were not running away from something. They were going towards something. When we interviewed Sister Margaret Mary, we asked, "Are you glad you became a nun?" She said, "I never once changed my mind about being a nun, and I'm so grateful to God that He helped me make this come true." This is she right here. "After all these years, I still can't get over how generous people are to us. Every single day, with all my heart and soul, I pray for our benefactors. They have kept us going here in Utah, and we are grateful, so grateful." I'd like to come back to our second nun, Sister Mary Catherine, or Lurleen Romney Cheney's story. She was born in 1900 in Chihuahua, Juarez, Mexico. She was part of the hundreds of the LDS families who fled to Mexico and created colonies after 1880 because of the anti-polygamy raids in Utah. But during the 1910 Mexican Revolution, anti-American sentiment forced many of the colonies to evacuate. Lurleen Romney ended up in Utah, married a Cheney, had 3 children, then later divorced. At age 52, she felt a calling to become a Carmelite nun. And she did so, and lived at the monastery until her death at 82. What a trajectory. Here's a photo of her with her daughter and kids visiting on the grounds of the monastery, and a later photo showing 4 generations of her family. How does one become a nun? Well, they apply and sit for an interview. But then they live with their sisters for a while they gauge whether the candidate will fit in. Carmelites require a year of probation, called postulancy, followed by 2 years of novitiate, in which initial vows are taken. Final vows are taken 5 to 6 years later. To be excused from final vows requires a dispensation from the Pope. According to Sister Mary Joseph, nuns aren't hiding from the world. She said, "If you are going to Carmel to escape, it's the wrong idea. You still have to face yourself. Introverts don't do well here. You would have to be able to live alone and like it, and like your fellow sisters, all the while creating your own solitude." There are currently 11 nuns at the monastery, with a maximum of 13. Each nun has a private, simple room called a cell, furnished with a bed, no longer of straw, a cross, a table, and a chair. If you want to communicate with the Carmelites, you ring the bell and then go to the turn, pictured here. You set the item you want to convey, a letter or a bag of food, into the cylinder, and then you rotate the cylinder 180 degrees. a nun will pick up your item from behind the wall. When their families visit, they usually visit through the grill. According to the Order of Carmelites worldwide organization, there is no Saint Carmel. Carmel is a place, a mountain in the Holy Land, or wherever Carmelites live together. It's a way of life. It's a destination, a religious order that follows an 800-year-old tradition of spirituality. The order today includes men and women, clerics, cloistered women, hermits, and lay people across the world. What does it mean to have a Carmel in Holladay? I reached out to Mayor Dolly, and he offered this. Quote, I would guess that the majority of residents do not know we have a monastery right here in Holladay. And when you study the mission of the Carmelites, I'm not sure they would be unhappy with that. As cloistered nuns, they value privacy and anonymity, and I'm proud that they have found that in Holladay. I view Holladay as a kind of small town inside a metropolitan area. I think the Carmelites view themselves as a spiritual haven inside a rapidly changing world. For that reason, Holladay is the perfect place for the Carmelites to have settled.